All right, hello and welcome to the March 23rd edition of the Cluster API provider AWS Office Hours, a sub-project of both SIG Cluster Lifecycle and the Cluster API project. Just a reminder that this meeting is recorded and will be posted up to YouTube later, and that the Kubernetes guidelines are in effect here. So in general, please be excellent to one another. All right. So first off, if you have any topics that you want to bring up, please go ahead and add them to the agenda. And feel free to add yourself to the attending list. If I can find the chat window, I can go ahead and link that in. And let me just bring up the participant list too. All right. So the first PSA that we had today, last week we released version 0.5.1, mostly a bug fix release, but it did add a minor new feature that loosened the way that we're doing the image lookups. So if somebody is building their own image with the image builder, there's more flexibility in how they name the image for us to be able to look it up. It's completely backwards compatible, so there should not be any issues with the existing images or compatibility of images with older versions at this time. With that said, do we have any demos for this week? I don't see any listed. No. All right, then moving on to the group topics. The first one is around UI workflow discussion. I'm not sure who put that there.
This is Mai.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah. Hey guys, my name is Matt. I've been kind of working on the side on a merge request for a capability in the way credentials and roles are assumed in AWS. And part of this came out of in specific environments where roles need to be assumed rather than specified in a credentials file. So just kind of from a high level, this PR adds a few additional fields to the credentials patch for the customized config. And I just kind of wanted to bounce some ideas in terms of how we ought to specify these things in order to have the best user experience for environments where we do need to have like an AWS config file rather than an AWS credentials file, and how to parse those things out in the customized build portion. So this PR is out there. It's a couple, I think it's going on a month, or yeah, it's give or take. And yeah, I just had to add in some additional logic in there also to allow that session to be created with the option specified rather than kind of a generic session object. So this is my first SIG meeting, so I was just kind of get the lay of the land and wanted to maybe bounce some ideas on what the best way to do that is. Right now, I kind of just created a config file and specify like in create config map from file and read it that way in the customize. But if there's any better ways or any alternatives that might be easier for the documentation or the installation guide, I'm happy to take suggestions also.
I see you have your hand raised, Andy.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you, Matt. I have a question. So let's say I don't have a config file. What happens with everything that's generated in the config map generator? Does it blow up or does it just work and deploy? Because I know that the deployment also is specifying the volume mount from the config map. So what happens if it's not there?
So when I tested it, it'll just create a config map with like default, it'll be a blank file. There'll be nothing in it. it's not optimal. There'll still be a file there, but it'll just be empty.
Okay, cool.
I know Nadir has been involved previously with some more complex AWS configurations using KIM and other role-based assumption. I think his feedback would probably be pretty valuable to make sure that we don't break those types of workflows as well.
Yeah, so yeah, I just want to check. So, well, I've got two comments. So one would be just ensuring that the changes that you've made to the session don't affect the ability to use any of the other bits of the credential chain. From reading it, it doesn't look like it. The other comment would, there's almost a, I mean, I know we discussed this on Slack a couple of weeks ago, or maybe 2 months ago, is there. So for the CLI at least, the old credentials file was actually deprecated or was not considered the preferred way. So there's possibly a case to be made to get rid of the credentials file completely and only have the config file as the way to configure credentials. Is that right?
Yeah, I also saw that when I was researching. Currently, though, the way that the installer is set up is there's a binary that reads in those environment variables and then base64s them into that customized config. So that would probably need to be changed.
Yeah, so we would need to change cluster AWS ADM as well and then we can have a single way to configure credentials by file. Yeah, not sure what that would be, an API change, but then I also assume majority users are just going through the workflow as well, and they might not even notice. So I'm not sure.
Andy?
Yeah, I am going to guess that 99% of production deployments, or ideally 100% of production deployments, are not going to use credentials for this, for any real cap deployment. So maybe we treat the credentials-based deployment option as a one-off, even though it's still probably going to be fairly frequently used by those of us working on Kappa in development. But maybe if we make the production deployment case the primary one and have an alternative for you want to use credentials and just make sure it's super easy to support both, maybe that's like some sort of avenue to explore.
Yeah, that sounds like kind of having different cases where, like in a generic like production type of deployment, you're going to want to specify all these, have the ability to specify in the config file all these options that aren't available in the credentials file.
Yeah. And I have a branch actually, no, I don't. I just wiped that laptop. I had a branch where I could, I really hacked up, customize a ton, and got rid of a bunch of the patching that we were doing and just had it be defaults for things like the pull policy and whatnot. But the more interesting part was for the credentials and for the image. So like right now when we do a Kappa release or a Cappy release, our make file is a bit messy where it says I need to go run sed and do some string replacement to get the image set correctly and to get the credentials in place. And so I had done a whole bunch of work to have a whole bunch of things get ignored, and you didn't have to do sed at all. And we may be able to look into something like that if I can find my branch, which is unlikely, but I can remember what I did. So maybe we do something like that and have that dovetail with the local development. I need credentials versus production deployment. I don't sort of distinction.
I've done quite a bit. I've done most. So in Cat we do already have that. I made those changes for the get ignore, and we do the sed in a separate directory that never gets done. So that all works now in Capri, so I can probably move that across to Kappa as well.
Yeah, I ended up just having it generate a patch file that had the image in it rather than trying to deal with sed, but same net effect.
And just to add one other thing is we probably don't necessarily want to break the existing workflows during kind of a patch release. So while we keep in mind, you know, future direction, we may want to look at breaking changes for the future. We will probably want to maintain some level of backwards compatibility still, at least until we get to the next breaking release.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think maybe for next step is maybe add the functionality to cluster AWS ADM to encode it as a credentials file. We can chat about that, Matt.
Yeah,
like.
I'd love to.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for looking over this in the time, and look forward to working with you all.
Great. Thanks a lot, Matt. All right. Next up, looks like Andy with the bootstrap failure detection.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this up. I know we don't necessarily have a full crew here, but I was thinking about this the other day since it's become a bit of a large thorn in our side, where if cloud init fails or the Kubedium init or join fails, we have no way to know. It may succeed partway, it may fail entirely. And so my original thinking with trying to do this was that we could use AWS Session Manager, or whatever its official name is, to hop into the VM and, I don't know, look for a file, like a marker file that says we're done, or check the status of Cloud Init. But based on some other conversations about Session Manager or Systems Manager not being in 100% of the AWS regions, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work, and we may need to find some other way to do it. But I just wanted to bring it up that it would be nice to start thinking about how to do AWS specific bootstrap failure detection, and that ideally we can get it in a, whether it's a patch release or our next minor. It's a major thing that I would like to try and figure out how to solve.
Yeah, I think you brought up the trickiest bit of that, in that Session Manager is not necessarily available in all of the various regions. There's one other gotcha with Session Manager as well, and that it doesn't appear to be available before Cloud Init finishes. So if Cloud Init actually errors out, you never appear to be able to connect with Session Manager.
So another thought is, and this is a security question for probably for Nadir and anybody else who knows the AWS IAM, like how fine grained it can be. But so one option is if Cloud Init succeeds, the VM itself could add a tag or some other metadata to the EC2 VM itself, assuming it only has permission to modify its own VM. And we'd have to work through the security aspects, as well as like, can we, like when should it do the metadata updates? Should it do it on failure and success? What happens if we don't get any updates for a period of time, et cetera? But Nadir, is that something that we could potentially explore, and having something in Cloud Init at the very end, just make a call to AWS to say, tag this VM as done?
Yeah, so if you look at, say, sort of where auto scaling groups, there's a way of sending notifications. So recommended ways to use something like SNS or EventBridge today is probably the way to go. So we'll set up Kappa would create a queue, subscribe to a topic, and then the machine would publish a message onto that topic, Kappa would receive it and make some decision based on that.
How do you secure the identity of them, or guarantee the identity of the message and don't have spoofing?
So on AWS, on one of the things that you get through instance metadata is an instance identity document, which is a signature of basically the instance ID signed by an AWS root certificate, which you can verify. So you can verify the identity of who made that message.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that because we've talked about using a similar mechanism for getting updates about resources when they've been created as well.
I think
Yeah,
it's
that's
probably something we need to explore.
Yeah, so that would allow us to react to machines being terminated instantly or getting retirement notifications saying this machine's going to get killed off in 2 days. What do you want to do about it?
I think the other benefit there too is I think that approach actually gives us more context to the failure as well. Whereas if we just look at potentially just tagging a resource, at that point, all we know is that it either succeeded or failed. We don't necessarily know why it failed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more information we can provide, the better. But the MVP use case or flow would basically be cloud init doesn't get all the way done for whatever reason. So we mark the machine as not fully bootstrapped. And then I don't know if the machine health check code is only looking at nodes or if it can handle machines without nodes. I don't remember off the top of my head, but either way, we get the machine health checker to basically say, oh, if a machine failed bootstrapping, then we shoot it in the head or whatever. And we figure out how to work with kubeam control plane as well. But I think something like that would really help make sure that we don't have like these half running control plane machines that sort of are control planes but aren't really, and whatever else that goes wrong.
So if we set failure message and failure reason on the infrastructure or the AWS machine, that will be picked up by the machine health check. So I think that, we can definitely, get the behavior there that we want.
Yeah, I mean, that at least covers machine sets and machine deployments, but it doesn't cover individual machines and it doesn't cover control plane machines. But we can find a way to work with that too. I think we're going to have to write some code in KCP for that. So that was all I had. I just wanted to bring this up. And if anybody's got ideas, I linked the overall cluster API issue because I think we're going to need some contract changes to cluster API itself, potentially. I mean, it could be like Jason said, we just set the failure reason and failure message and that's sufficient. Or we could decide we want to have an additional detail that says bootstrapping failed and then it would be an API change. So 2554 is the cluster API one that talks about possible contract changes. And then the other tab is a Kappa specific one that Jason has there, 972, that I think we can use to rally around how do we want to implement this specifically for Kappa.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Are there? Yeah, this may not be the right time for this question, but I can ask it later. Are there like basic smoke API calls and things that are made before all the machinery of spinning a machine comes up? It's kind of like maybe a naive question, but like sometimes there's stupid things that can go wrong that may not have anything to do with deep infrastructure failures that might be permission related and so on.
So there's not too much today, mainly because if we're talking about the machine side like we are right now, there really isn't too much smoke checking that we can do that we don't get feedback on generally from the initial callback. you know, there's probably some things that we could do around validating configuration and things like that, but that gets us into very specific versions of kubeadm that we're trying to run against, and you know, potential issues there with both support and maintenance of, you know, those types of checks.
Okay, like what's the most canonical cloud init failure that went during bootstrapping?
I think the biggest one that we're seeing right now is related to kind of transient issues that don't have enough retries, or the retry may not be long enough in kubeadm itself.
Okay, cool. I thought there may have been some stuff with attaching disks or, you know, getting IP addresses set up and things like that, but okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're seeing too many of those in the common use case today.
Okay, cool.
Any other topics before we jump into the issue triage?
Hi guys, this is Andrew. Just wanted to say hi. It's been a minute. Thanks for reviewing that security groups PR. I'm going to be submitting another one for subnet. VPCs and subnets, I think. And I've also I'm also very interested in the issue around multi AWS accounts. So at some point I wanted to catch up with you guys about that, but there's a pretty detailed comment, and I think the summary is I'm going to provide a proposal about our the implementation I could take, and want to square that with the other people's thoughts around it.
I know Nadir has a lot of feedback around the AWS account handling, and especially when we start looking at multi-tenancy. He's been involved in some of our more complicated use cases around authentication. So we'll definitely want to make sure to take some of those into account, so that when we look at like role assumption, or you know, the use of like KIAM to proxy, you know, authentication requests and things like that, that we continue to support those use cases as well. But glad to have you on board. We've appreciated the contributions you've had so far, and look forward to continuing it in the future. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns, or topics? All right, let's jump in. Let's see. So, all right, let's start with the pull requests that don't yet have a milestone. This one was around links in the documentation and waiting on feedback, so I'll leave that there. We have the one for enabling security group roles with existing groups. All right. This is an additive change to the API, but it is optional. Do you have thoughts here, Andy, about
I'm fine with additive optional things as long as they're truly optional and they don't cause breaking changes if you submit an older copy that doesn't have the fields and the controllers break and whatnot. I think it's fine to iterate on in Alpha 3. I mean, otherwise this is going to have to wait for Alpha 4, and I don't know that there's a real reason to wait, right?
Yeah. All right. So go ahead and put that in the 05X milestone. Let's see. That one, we have add a flag option for uncompressed user data.
What is 1639?
Let's see. Oh,
Yeah, this is support ignition.
yeah. So
Is this a
have you?
flag or an API change?
I believe it would be an API change.
Yeah,
Should have been,
I saw a flag. It needs to be an API
Yeah.
change.
yeah, should have been additive.
All right. The one thing that I worry about though is this one is an additive change, but this is going to potentially be a major behavioral change in the controller too, will it not?
I think it's
Or
fair
is
to
it just
think
around the
about this one.
compression? Yeah. All right. So we can swing back around to this one later if we need to, I think.
Did you want to put it in next,
Um,
or just
yeah, I can.
wait for now?
I think wait for now. I don't think I have enough context to determine if it's safe to bring it into the 05X or if we need to bump it to next yet. And let's see, ensure the ELB is resolvable before marking is ready. This is fixing an issue. All right, I think it's safe to go ahead and put this one in the milestone. And then skip ELB control plane registration if node is not registered yet. And I know we talked about this briefly earlier, Nadir. Did you want to provide more context? Well, when I talked to Nadir about this earlier, there was an issue with the vSphere provider and attempting to add things to the HA proxy load balancer that it uses by default before the instance was actually ready. I'm
Yeah, we
not.
don't need it.
Oh, yeah.
You can close this one, I think. I don't think it's relevant to the AWS context.
Yeah, I think it was mostly related to the different behavioral changes between the ELB Classic and HA Proxy when adding a new instance. And unless anybody feels that we need it for consistency reasons, I don't think there's necessarily a reason that we need it for behavioral reasons. So I'll go ahead and close this one. All right, moving on to issues. And without a milestone. All right, the user data should not be compressed. I don't think we have an idea, like I'll defer on that one right now for the same reason as the PR. Support multi-AZ with default AWS configuration. This goes back to some discussions that we had about how to enable HA deployments better than we currently do today, where you actually have to manually specify subnets that you want to put things in and CIDR blocks for those subnets. We potentially have the ability to automate the creation of subnets across availability zones and make that experience around standing up HA clusters a little bit better. I know Ben has been working on it. I don't think he is on the call today. But we've been talking potentially about a way to do this in a backwards compatible way. But I don't think we've actually settled on what that looks like yet. So I think we may have to defer on assigning a milestone until we have a better idea of what that looks like. And customizable image lookup format. Do you want to provide more color to this one, Andy?
I mean, this may have been covered by the PR that was it yours, Jason, that loosened? Yeah, your PR that loosened the search criteria. Let me circle back with some of our internal consumers and see if they need any more changes, or we can just close this. I'll update it later.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
You can put it in next for now.
All right. And then the last one is cluster failed to describe VPCs. All right. From what I could tell, it looked like it was related to missing a step for deploying the IAM roles and profiles needed. And we did file an issue with Upstream Cluster API for improving the documentations around making it more clear, but we haven't gotten any feedback yet on that. So let me go ahead and what's the priority for? Let's see. Awaiting more evidence. And for now, I'll go ahead and put this in next until we get further feedback. I don't necessarily believe this is an issue beyond that documentation one. All right. That gets us through the issues. Circling back, do we have any other agenda items, questions, comments, concerns before we wrap up? All right. Thank you all, and I will see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.